So we come back to this idea of whether or not we can modulate aging over and over in this course. And ultimately, what we've learned is that we know that aging, at the end of the day, is still a random stochastic process, mostly driven by entropy. And at some point, that entropy is going to win. So what we can modify are age-related diseases, right? And so advances in medical technology, disease treatment, have allowed us to more effectively prevent age-related diseases as well as diagnose them and treat them. And this has led to gains in life expectancy, which you can see here between 1910 and 2010. And ultimately, we can probably modify all age-related diseases to the point at which they no longer matter at all. But underneath that, we're still aging. And so aging itself can't be stopped or modified. Our best hope in terms of changing anything about aging is to modulate the rate at which we age and to kind of slow down the aging process. And luckily there are some things that have been shown to modulate the rate of aging as well as modified lifespan. But really there's only kind of two things, one of which is caloric restriction, which I'm going to discuss in this lecture, and the other is exercise, which I'll discuss in the next one. And so what caloric restriction is basically a condition where the calorie intake is modified and decreased without altering any composition of nutrients. And caloric restriction experiments have been done for a long time, and they were first done in rodents in the laboratory, specifically in rats. And when the rats' caloric intake was decreased without altering their intake of nutrients, the caloric restriction actually increased both mean and maximum lifespan. And you can see that here in this figure. Caloric restricted mice are in blue, and mice that were allowed to eat pretty much whatever they wanted in terms of calories can be seen in orange. And this is showing survival, or kind of lifespan, or percent of animals, on the y-axis, and the number of days on the x. And so by looking at survival of animals at about 50% survival, it tells you where the mean lifespan is for these animals. And so when the rats ate whatever they wanted, that mean lifespan is somewhere around 500 days. In the mice that have undergone caloric restriction, that mean lifespan was almost doubled and extended out to about 1,000 days. And that is a dramatic result. And not only was it just kind of the average lifespan that increased, it was the maximum lifespan as well, or the longevity. As you can see, the rats that ate whatever they wanted have a maximum lifespan of about 900 days. And that was increased by about 33%. These caloric restricted mice have a maximum lifespan around 1,300 days. And so these results are really striking, right? And when we're talking about caloric restriction, what we're really talking about is a 30 to 40% decrease in the number of calories. And once again, this is not like the amount of food. This is just specifically decreasing calories without altering any other nutrients, right? And so just by restricting the calories, the researchers were able to extend both mean and maximum lifespan in rats. But 30 to 40% decrease in calories is a lot, right? That's 1/3 of the calories that they kind of chose to take in themselves. And so the next step was to really look at what happens to lifespan as you, at kind of different levels of caloric restriction, to see if you really need to decrease calories by this much in order to see any effect. And what you'll notice here that mean and maximum lifespans are shown for mice or rats that are allowed to eat whatever they want, and ones that have some caloric restrictions. And what you'll notice is that both the mean and max lifespan increase under caloric restriction, and they increase kind of proportionally to the amount of calories taken in. So lifespan increases as calorie intake decreases. And what's interesting to note is that those conducting the study saw a change in the mean and max lifespan, although a minimal one, at only a 10% reduction of caloric intake, which is pretty promising. And ultimately, what subsequent experiments in caloric restriction have told us is that it's truly the calories that matter. You can actually supplement the diets of caloric restricted mice with additional vitamins and nutrients. They have no additional kind of helpful or further increase of lifespan. So it seems like it really is just the calories that matter. And it also doesn't matter where those calories come from. They can come from protein, carbohydrates, or fats, and there's really no difference. It's just straight up less calories extends lifespan. And in addition to extending lifespan, caloric restriction delays almost every single age-related phenotype that exists in rodents. Whether it's their immune response, their metabolism, the levels of hormones, every single age-related decline that's observed in mice in the laboratory can be ameliorated by caloric restriction. Which means not only are the mice living longer, or the rats living longer, but they're living better, right? And so caloric restriction can decrease generation of oxidative species and decrease oxidative stress. And caloric restriction has been shown to upregulate expression of chaperones, right? And so by upregulating chaperones, you help preserve the integrity of some of your proteins and biomolecules for a longer period of time. And so it's possible that through decreased ROS generation and upregulation of chaperones, caloric restriction is actually having this kind of effect on all these age-related phenotypes. Not only does caloric restriction help with kind of the normal aging phenotypes, but it also helps prevent and delay age-related disease development in rodent models as well. So if we look here, these are the incidence of different types of cancers in mice at their time of death following long-term calorie restriction. And so if we look at the mice that eat whatever they want, those are in orange. And you can see that in every type of cancer, the mice with caloric restriction have kind of a less incidence or less prevalence of this type of cancer. And mice that at their time of death have no tumors were more likely calorie restricted than those that ate themselves. And this is true also for kidney disease as well. So it seems like caloric restriction can actually have an effect on these age-related diseases, at least in rodent models. And I think one important thing to note is that when they were doing these experiments, they originally started caloric restriction kind of at birth for those mice, right? So right after they were weaned, they were undergoing this very intense caloric restriction. But they have actually pushed the start of caloric restriction back to about 18 months of life to mimic what might be happening sort of in the human population. And they see just as strong amelioration of phenotypes and extension of lifespan when they start restricting calories later in life as they do when they restrict them for the entire lifespan of the mice. And this is also true in kind of the simpler but no less appreciated other model organisms like worms and Drosophila. So caloric restriction extends both the mean and maximum lifespan in both of these organisms. And you can see that here on the top in C. elegans and on the bottom in Drosophila. Calorie restricted animals have a higher mean lifespan as well as higher maximum lifespan than worms that were allowed to eat whatever they want or flies that were allowed to eat whatever they want. And these model organisms have provided some kind of insight into what might be going on at the molecular level that leads to this caloric restriction mediated lifespan extension. And really in both C. elegans and Drosophila melanogaster, The calorie restriction is associated with a delay in reproduction, as well as a decrease in the amount of progeny laid. And so it seems like there might be some trade-off hypothesis at work here, where caloric restriction initiates a trade-off in the organism, where it devotes more resources to its body tissues and allows lifespan to be extended, and diverts resources away from reproduction. And so what about caloric restriction in humans, right? It would be really great if we could eat less calories as humans and extend our own lifespan, as well as improve our health span and how we age, right? And modulate that rate of aging. It's really difficult to conduct a study like this in humans, mostly because humans have the free will to choose what they want to eat, and whether they want to follow the prescribed kind of diet regimens associated with a caloric restriction experiment. The best kind of long-term caloric restriction experiment in humans was a 2-year-long longitudinal study of about 150 people, both young and old, male and female, all of whom were healthy at the start of this experiment. And what these individuals agreed to do is reduce their calorie intake by 25%, which for perspective is about 600 calories per day. And in the first 6 months, these individuals were able to actually decrease their calories by 19%. But then for the next 18 months up until the end of the study, that average calorie decrease for all these individuals was only about 9%. And so what's important to note from this, I guess, is that it's hard for humans to keep to such a strong calorie reduction regimen. But what's also important to note is that even when it's not done perfectly, and this caloric restriction didn't meet that 25% goal, individuals who were in the caloric restriction group in orange actually had reduced levels of a lot of different risk factors that are correlated with age-dependent disease, such as total levels of cholesterol and triglycerides in the blood. So you can see that in sort of the normal group that was allowed to eat as many calories as they want, compared to the calorie-restricted group, there's a massive decrease in the amount of cholesterol in the blood in those who were under caloric restriction. And this was held true at the end of the study as well, even with a 9% average calorie decrease. And that's true for all of these different things, right? And that's important because these things that are measured in the graph on the right are cholesterol and blood pressure, which are known to be risk factors for developing type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And it sort of argues that caloric restriction and being able to decrease your calories, even if it's only 10%, can have major health benefits, and can potentially actually extend lifespan in humans as well.